We do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. Anais Nin. There comes a moment, rare, fragile, but unmistakably profound, when the entire scaffolding of our perception trembles just enough for us to glimpse what lies beneath. It doesn't need to be triggered by a crisis or a ritual or even deliberate inquiry. Sometimes it happens in the most mundane of circumstances. You're walking down the street. You're sitting at a bus stop. You're gazing absent-mindedly out a window. And then something strange occurs. A crack opens in the habitual lens through which you see reality, and for a fleeting second, you step outside of the performance that has always felt so personal, so central, and so solid. You look around, and something is different. You notice people, not just as background figures in the story of your day, but as radiant centers of stories you will never know. The barista, the cyclist, the man adjusting his sleeve at the crosswalk, they are not extras. They are entire worlds, entire timelines. Each is moving through a cosmos as rich, as tangled, as urgent as your own. And just like that, the illusion shatters. The illusion that you are at the center of something called reality. What you took for granted as your show dissolves into a vast theater of overlapping spotlights, each actor believing themselves to be center stage. And in that rare clarity, you realize there is no center. There never was. This moment has a name. It's called Sonder. It is the sudden awareness that every stranger you pass is living a life as vivid and intricate as yours. That all the passing cars, glowing windows, silent faces in waiting rooms and queues, all of them belong to inner worlds teeming with memories, dreams, regrets, joys, losses. You are no longer looking at people. You are brushing against their realities, brief and gentle collisions of light in an immeasurable constellation. And in that overwhelming realization, something in you shifts. Something old begins to dissolve. The question is no longer, what is everyone thinking of me? It becomes who or what is behind all this looking. The more this sensation settles in, the more unsettling it becomes. Not because it's dark, but because it stretches the limits of what you thought was possible. It breaks the spell of self-reference, revealing that what you called me might just be a fleeting node in a much wider network of awareness. Something ancient, something communal, something deeply mysterious. You begin to see that consciousness itself is not confined to a skull or a narrative. It is the medium in which all narratives are written. It is not merely something you possess, but something you are immersed in, something you participate in, something that watches, even as you believe you are the one doing the watching. And that's when the weird things start to happen. The more you examine consciousness, the less familiar it becomes. You try to look at it like an object, but it eludes your gaze because it is the gaze. You try to find its edges, but there are none. You ask where it comes from, but every answer you reach only seems to mirror your own assumptions back to you. Consciousness, it turns out, is not a puzzle to be solved like a riddle on paper. It is the very canvas on which all puzzles appear. And the more you stare at it, the more it stares back, asking questions you didn't know were yours to answer. In this silence, another paradox begins to emerge. The very act of trying to define consciousness changes it. The very effort to study it from the outside distorts what it is on the inside. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You realize that you are entangled in the phenomenon you are trying to understand. You are the experiment and the observer, the performance and the audience. And with this realization, the mind begins to crack open. Because the world is no longer just out there. It is alive in the looking. It is woven into attention itself. You start to wonder, if every person lives in a spotlight of their own, if every mind is a world within a world, then what is the stage upon which all these spotlights fall? Who is orchestrating this concert of inner lives and shared realities? And more than that, what does it mean that we know this is happening, even if we don't understand it. What does it say about the nature of consciousness that it can become aware of itself in this way? Fractured, recursive, luminous. These questions are not idle curiosities. They are fault lines in the fabric of everything we take for granted. Because when you begin to truly examine consciousness, not in an academic or detached way, but with the trembling intimacy of one who realizes the ground beneath their feet is made of sky, then you begin to feel that you are not merely looking out at the world, but participating in the unfolding of reality itself. And in that unfolding, something sacred stirs. Something ancient. Something that knows it has always been watching through every pair of eyes, hearing through every echo, feeling through every breath. Consciousness, it seems, is not a private possession. It is a shared field. And in that field, every life is a note, every mind a chord, every moment a frequency resonating with the whole. This is the beginning. Not of an answer, but of a deeper question. Not of knowing, but of remembering. In the next part, we'll follow this thread further and explore the illusion of objectivity and what begins to unravel when you realize that reality might not exist independently of the one who sees it. To be human is to live at the center of a story that feels uniquely ours. We do not wake up into someone else's dreams or inhabit a stranger's stream of consciousness. We awaken again and again inside the familiar interior of the self. There is memory, there is language, there is a name that responds when called. And from this core, the world seems to spread outward. People enter and exit, events unfold, scenes are set and reset as though some invisible playwright is tailoring the script to revolve around us. But what if this perception of centrality is not an accurate reflection of the world, but a deeply ingrained illusion? What if the experience of being the protagonist is simply what it feels like to be a node of consciousness? Any node, anywhere, in any mind. The illusion of being central is not only common, it is functional. Our brains evolved to maintain a coherent self-narrative because it enhances survival. If we did not believe in the importance of our continued existence, we would not eat, reproduce, or defend ourselves. But this illusion, though useful, also blinds us to a larger truth. No one is watching our life unfold as attentively as we are. Everyone else is immersed in their own drama, equally absorbed, equally convinced. And so we live among billions of main characters, each performing their roles, unaware that the stage itself may be a shared hallucination. This is not simply poetic reflection. It is deeply rooted in psychology. The phenomenon, known as the spotlight effect, describes our tendency to overestimate how much others notice our behavior, mistakes, or appearance. The brain's default mode network, active when we are not focused on external tasks, reinforces an ongoing internal monologue centered on the self. This inner voice, weaving thoughts into personal narrative, gives the illusion that there is a stable, continuous I observing it all. Yet neuroscience reveals that the self is not located in a single region of the brain, but is a dynamic construct, emergent, fluid, and context-dependent. And still, despite this knowledge, we continue to feel like observers behind the eyes. The ones watching, choosing, directing the story. We refer to this phenomenon as consciousness, but we rarely pause to examine what that actually means. Who is doing the observing? Is the observer real? Or is it just another layer of thought pretending to be above the fray? If we try to isolate it, to point at the exact locus of awareness, we find that it slips away like a shadow in the dark. The observer, it turns out, may not be an entity at all, but a process, a dance of perception and identification occurring in real time. To investigate this is to confront one of the deepest riddles of existence. What is an observer? Is it the same as attention? Is it synonymous with awareness? Is it a product of the brain, or something more fundamental, something embedded into the very structure of reality itself? In daily life, We assume that the world is out there, fixed and real, and that we are passive receivers of its signals. But the deeper we look, the more cracks begin to form in this story. And those cracks don't just expose gaps in our perception, they challenge the very nature of reality. What we call reality is always mediated. Our senses filter information through layers of interpretation and memory. We do not see the world as it is, but as it appears to us, colored by past experiences, cultural assumptions, linguistic structures, emotional states. Perception is not a window but a lens, bending the incoming light into shapes that we can comprehend. Even the passage of time, which feels so objective and linear, is subjective in profound ways. When we are anxious, minutes feel like hours. In flow states, hours vanish in a blink. The world dances not just to its own rhythm, but to the rhythm of the observer's mind. And yet, we continue to believe in an objective world that exists independently of us. This belief is not unfounded. It is reinforced by consistency. When we leave a room and return to it, we expect the furniture to be in the same place. When we drop an object, it falls, not because we willed it, but because gravity exists as an external law. The predictability of the world persuades us that it is solid, separate, and indifferent to our minds. But what if this consistency is not proof of objectivity, but of intersubjectivity, a shared hallucination held in place by countless overlapping perceptions? This question strikes at the heart of the observer effect, a concept we will explore more rigorously through the lens of quantum physics in the next section. But even before we arrive at the subatomic level, the cracks are already forming in our conventional understanding. The philosopher Immanuel Kant once argued that we never encounter the thing in itself, the objective world, but only the phenomena, the appearances, filtered through our faculties. We are, in effect, prisoners of perspective. And yet something in us knows this. Something in us suspects that the observer is not separate from the observed, but intricately entangled with it. If this is true, then the implications ripple outward in every direction. Every choice, every interpretation, every act of attention may not just be a private mental event. It may be a participatory act in shaping reality. What we focus on grows in meaning. What we ignore fades from existence. Our beliefs filter perception. Our expectations shape outcomes. In this light, consciousness is not simply witnessing reality. It is weaving it. We are not just watching the play. We are writing the script in real time, sometimes knowingly, often blindly. This realization does not mean that the external world is a fiction. Rather, it suggests that reality is co-authored by both the world and the mind. That experience is an emergent property of the relationship between what is perceived and the one who perceives. And once you see this, truly see it, you cannot go back. The illusion of separateness begins to unravel. The idea of a neutral observer fades. You begin to sense that awareness is not in the body, but that the body is in awareness. That the self is not observing the world, but arising within it. And that is where the door begins to open. Because if the observer is not fixed, not singular, not central, then what is watching through your eyes right now? And more importantly, what happens to reality when it is seen in this way? In the next part, we will explore these questions through a lens where the lines between observer and observed begin to blur entirely. The strange and disorienting realm of quantum mechanics. There's a deep comfort in believing that the world exists as it is, regardless of our awareness of it, that the stars still burn even when no one is watching, that the trees still fall in forests unheard, that there is a floor beneath our feet, even when our eyes are closed. This is the essence of philosophical realism, the idea that reality is objective, external, and independent of any observer. For most of us, this belief is so foundational that we hardly ever question it. We build our lives upon it, our sciences, our institutions. But what if this assumption is not a certainty, but a belief? What if the reality we cling to so tightly is not as independent as it seems? Long before the quantum revolution forced physicists to wrestle with the nature of observation, the philosopher George Berkeley proposed something that at the time was considered both radical and absurd. In the early 18th century, Berkeley argued that the material world doesn't exist independently of our minds, that all that exists are perceptions and the minds that perceive them. Esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. This was not simply poetic language. It was a metaphysical claim. For Berkeley, the tree does not exist outside of someone seeing or imagining it. The table is not real unless it is experienced. There is no world out there, only ideas within consciousness. Of course, this view drew ridicule. It violated every intuition we have about the world's permanence. If reality only exists when perceived, what happens when no one is looking? Do houses vanish when we sleep? Does the moon disappear behind the clouds? Even Berkeley knew this was a difficult pill to swallow. His solution was theological. God is the ultimate observer, the ever-present perceiver whose gaze keeps reality stitched together, even when no human eye is watching. In this way, Berkeley tried to reconcile subjective idealism with the apparent stability of the world. The candle continues to burn in the empty room because God is there to see it. To many, this sounded like a clever sleight of hand, philosophical acrobatics to avoid collapsing into solipsism. But underneath the religious scaffolding was a deeper insight. That perception and existence are intimately intertwined. That reality, in some mysterious way, is not just given, but arises. And this, centuries later, would echo in the most cutting-edge discoveries of modern physics. Still, the objections persist. If everything is perception, then what of things we do not perceive, but which still seem to follow laws? If you light a candle in a sealed, empty room and return hours later, you'll find the wax melted, the wick shorter, the flame extinguished. How could this be if no one was there to observe it? Does consciousness create reality, or merely reveal it? If no one hears the tree fall, perhaps it still falls, but its sound exists only as a potential until heard. Or maybe even the fall itself is undefined until known. These are not questions of poetic musing anymore. They sit at the heart of science. For a long time, idealism was dismissed as outdated metaphysics, incompatible with the empirical rigor of science. But then came quantum mechanics. And with it, the ground beneath realism began to tremble. As scientists explored the behavior of subatomic particles, electrons, photons, quarks, they found something deeply unsettling. The world, at its smallest scales, did not behave like a set of fixed, objective objects bouncing around in a deterministic universe. Instead, it behaved like a mystery, one that changed depending on whether or not you looked at it. This is where Berkeley's ghost returned, not in robes, but in lab coats. Because if observation could affect what is measured, then reality might not be entirely real in the absence of awareness. The implications were staggering, but even before we enter that domain, it's worth pausing to ask, what if Berkeley wasn't entirely wrong? What if he was simply too early? Let us revisit his argument in a slightly different light. Suppose we say, the world as experienced only exists in relation to consciousness. That does not mean that nothing exists when no one is looking, but rather that what exists cannot be known or even defined in the absence of observation. This subtle shift reframes idealism not as a denial of the world, but as an acknowledgement that the world, as we know it, is co-created through the act of perception. We do not passively receive the world. We participate in its unfolding. And this, increasingly, is what science is beginning to confront. Not as a belief system, but as a necessity. In quantum physics, the properties of particles remain undefined until measured. A photon can exist as a wave or a particle, and it behaves differently depending on the experimental setup. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrates that the very act of observing a particle changes its behavior. It is not merely that we do not know what the particle is doing until we look. It is that the particle is not doing anything definite until we look. This sounds absurd, and yet it has been confirmed again and again. When we choose to measure a particle's position, it gives us a location. When we choose to measure its velocity, it gives us a different answer. But it never offers both at once. It's as though reality responds to the questions we ask of it, and the answers are not pre-written, but generated in real time. This is not merely philosophical speculation. It is empirical data. At this point, the boundary between philosophy and physics begins to blur. Are we discovering the universe or conversing with it? Is reality a static backdrop or an unfolding dialogue? The more we peer into the fabric of existence, the more it resembles something participatory, not a stage upon which consciousness acts, but a mirror that shifts and shapes itself according to what is seen. And here, Berkeley's immaterialism finds an unexpected ally in quantum theory. But not all physicists agree. Many believe the measurement problem can be explained through hidden variables, multiple universes, or decoherence. Realism is not dead. It is evolving. But even in these efforts, the role of observation continues to haunt the equations. Consciousness may not create the world ex nihilo, but it may serve as the tuning fork through which possibilities collapse into actualities. So we return to the question, is reality there when we are not looking? Perhaps. But what reality? In what form? Perhaps the world is a cloud of potential until consciousness calls it into focus. Perhaps objectivity is not the absence of subjectivity, but the sum total of all subjective perspectives. Perhaps the illusion is not that we are dreaming, but that we ever believed we were fully awake. In the next section, we'll leave the philosophical ground and enter the quantum laboratory. We'll explore the precise experiments that forced science to reckon with observation, not as a passive gaze, but as an active participant in the cosmos. Because when particles behave differently, simply because we look, something foundational must be re-examined, not only in physics, but in the very way we define reality itself. At the edge of certainty, where logic breaks down and intuition turns traitor, lies the quantum world, a place so strange, so delicately balanced between possibility and actuality, that to look upon it is to change it. Here, the assumptions of classical physics begin to collapse. Objects are not always in one place. Outcomes are not predetermined. And most unsettling of all, particles behave differently depending on whether or not they are being observed. In this microscopic realm, the very fabric of reality begins to shimmer with ambiguity, inviting us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about truth, existence, and the role of the observer. In the early 20th century, as scientists probed the atom and its subatomic components, they encountered a mystery that would upend the foundations of physical science. When studying electrons and photons, particles of light, they discovered a strange duality. In certain experimental setups, particles behaved like solid objects. In others, they acted like waves, spread out across space. The decisive factor wasn't the particle itself, but how it was measured. The experiment determined the outcome. The question shaped the answer. This was no small glitch. It was a revelation. The same particle could exhibit totally different behaviors, based solely on how we chose to observe it. And this wasn't metaphorical. It was repeatable, measurable, and consistent. One of the most famous demonstrations of this phenomenon is the double-slit experiment. Imagine firing single photons, particles of light, toward a barrier with two slits, and then detecting them on a screen behind. If no one observes which slit the photon goes through, it behaves like a wave, creating an interference pattern on the screen as if it passed through both slits simultaneously. But if we place a detector to observe which slit it passes through, the interference disappears. The photon behaves like a particle, going through just one slit. The mere act of observation collapses the wave of probabilities into a specific outcome. This is not merely strange, it is profoundly unsettling, because it suggests that physical reality, what actually happens, depends on the presence of a conscious observer, that a photon decides how to behave only when we ask the question. Prior to that, its state is not just unknown but undefined. It exists as a set of probabilities, not as a thing. This insight challenges the bedrock assumption of classical physics: determinism. Classical determinism, championed by Newton and later refined by Einstein, posits that the universe operates like a grand machine. Every effect has a cause. Every outcome is a logical consequence of prior conditions. If we knew all the variables, we could predict the future with perfect accuracy. But the quantum world refuses this certainty. Instead, it gives us a strange form of potentiality, reality, not as a settled fact, but as a field of probabilities awaiting collapse. Einstein famously resisted this view. God does not play dice with the universe, he insisted, unwilling to accept that randomness and subjectivity could sit at the core of nature. He believed there must be hidden variables, unknown factors that, if discovered, would restore determinism. But decades of experiments have failed to reveal these hidden variables. Instead, the evidence continues to point towards something even more radical: that the universe is inherently indeterminate at its foundation. That reality does not exist in a fixed form until observed. That we are not merely looking at the world, we are participating in its manifestation. Niels Bohr, Einstein's contemporary and intellectual rival, embraced this uncertainty. Bohr and his colleagues developed what became known as the Copenhagen Interpretation of quantum mechanics, which holds that particles exist in superposition, a state of multiple possibilities, until they are observed. Only through observation does the wave function collapse into a definite state. This interpretation remains one of the most widely taught frameworks in physics today, and it suggests that observation is not a passive event. It is a creative act. But this raises a troubling question. What qualifies as an observation? Is it the presence of a conscious mind? Or is any interaction sufficient? Can a machine observe? Can a photon detect another photon? Physicists have debated these questions for decades, and no consensus has emerged. Some interpretations argue that consciousness is essential to collapse the wave function. Others propose that decoherence, interaction with the environment, is enough. Yet the mystery persists. Why does the act of measurement change what is being measured? Even more perplexing is the result of delayed choice experiments, first proposed by John Archibald Wheeler. These experiments suggest that a photon's behavior can be affected by a measurement decision made after it has already passed through the apparatus. In other words, the present choice retroactively determines the past event. Reality, it seems, is not just responsive, but strangely fluid in time. Cause and effect blur. And the act of observation not only defines the present, it may even rewrite the past. This is not science fiction. It is peer-reviewed, reproducible physics. And it forces us to confront the possibility that the universe is far less objective than we imagined. That observation does not merely uncover what is already there, but participates in the very formation of what is real. This is not idealism in the old philosophical sense, nor is it strict materialism. It is something new, a hybrid worldview in which reality and perception are entangled at the deepest level. The implications of this are staggering. If the universe responds to observation, then what we call objective reality is not entirely separate from us. It is relational. It is co-arising. We are not outside the system looking in. We are within the system, shaping it as we experience it. Every act of awareness becomes an event in the cosmos. Every question we ask is not just a search for answers. It is a force that alters the field of potential. To observe is to participate. To know is to transform. This idea, once relegated to the fringes of philosophy, is now an unavoidable consequence of our best science. And it invites a radical rethinking of what it means to be human. We are not passive witnesses to a dead mechanical world. We are nodes of awareness embedded in a living field of potential. We are co-creators of a reality that waits for our attention to take form. Still, even as the math supports these conclusions, our minds resist them. We want things to be solid, permanent, knowable. We want the moon to be there when we're not looking. And maybe it is. But what this new science suggests is that our looking is not irrelevant. That consciousness may play a more fundamental role in the structure of the cosmos than we ever dared imagine. In the next part, we'll follow this mystery even further, into the realm of entanglement, where particles remain connected across vast distances, and where the very notion of space and time begins to fracture. Because if observation can collapse a wave, what happens when two particles are separated by light years and still act as one? The story of the observer is only beginning, and it's about to get stranger still. If quantum mechanics shattered the illusion of determinism, then quantum entanglement shattered something even more fundamental: the illusion of separation. It is one thing to imagine that particles are probabilistic, that their behavior is undefined until observed. It is something else entirely to discover that particles can become mysteriously, irrevocably connected, that what happens to one instantaneously affects the other, no matter how far apart they may be. This is not poetic metaphor. It is measurable, it is repeatable, and it may be the most counterintuitive revelation in the history of science. In the early 1970s, physicist John Clauser conducted a now historic experiment to test what had long been a source of philosophical discomfort: whether particles that interact and then separate can still influence each other without any signal being exchanged. This phenomenon, which Einstein had skeptically referred to as spooky action at a distance, became the focus of rigorous scientific inquiry. Clauser's experiments, later built upon by Alain Aspect in France and Anton Zeilinger in Austria, confirmed what many found impossible to accept. When one entangled particle is measured, the other's state becomes immediately determined, regardless of the distance between them. This finding violated one of the most cherished principles in physics: locality. Locality states that objects can only be influenced by their immediate surroundings, that nothing, not even information, can travel faster than the speed of light. But entanglement defies this principle. Two particles, once entangled, behave as a unified system. Measure one here and the other, across the room, across the planet, across the galaxy, responds instantly. It is as if the separation never occurred, as if space itself had no say in the matter. To be clear, this does not mean that information is traveling faster than light. That would break causality. What it suggests instead is far stranger: that the entangled particles are not truly separate, that they exist in a kind of shared state, a holistic unity that transcends space. This is not conjecture. In 2022, Clauser, Aspect, and Zeilinger were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for this work, validating entanglement as a real and profound feature of the universe. What does this mean? It means that the world is not locally real, that events happening in one location cannot always be understood independently of events occurring elsewhere. This breaks the spine of the classical worldview. In a locally real universe, the properties of objects exist prior to and independent of measurement, and influences are confined by the speed of light. Entanglement says otherwise. It tells us that the act of measuring one particle determines the outcome of another, even when they are light years apart, and it does so instantly. This is not just a challenge to physics, it is a challenge to how we think. Our everyday experience is built upon the notion of separation. You are here, I am there. A star in another galaxy is unimaginably far away. And yet, in the quantum world, distance is no obstacle. Two particles born of the same interaction, even if torn apart by cosmic forces, remain in dialogue. Their connection is not spatial. It is relational. It exists not in where they are, but in what they are together. Here, the implications grow more profound. If locality is not fundamental, then space itself may be emergent, not a container in which reality unfolds, but a construct arising from deeper levels of entanglement. Some physicists speculate that space and time, the very fabric of the universe, may arise from the information shared between entangled systems. That what we experience as separation is a kind of illusion, a useful map that hides the deeper terrain. This resonates deeply with ancient spiritual traditions that have long insisted that all is one, that beneath the apparent multiplicity of the world lies a unity that defies language. The Upanishads, Buddhist non-dualism, and even mystic strands of Christian and Sufi theology all echo this insight, that we are not truly separate beings, but differentiated expressions of a singular field. And now, quantum entanglement seems to whisper something eerily similar from the edge of the laboratory. But science is not interested in affirming mysticism. Its job is to measure, to predict, to replicate. What makes entanglement so stunning is that it has been measured, again and again. No hidden signal, no loophole, just instantaneous correlation beyond space. And every time the experiments confirm what no intuition wants to believe, the old assumptions loosen their grip. The classical dream of a neatly ordered universe, where each object has its own place, its own properties, its own destiny, begins to dissolve. And still, we resist. We return to our bodies, our cities, our timelines. We eat our meals, scroll our screens, speak our names. We pretend that we are alone inside ourselves, untouched by distant stars or invisible particles. But if quantum entanglement is real, and it is, then the boundaries we live by are not as fixed as we thought. The person across the room, the bird in the sky, the photon from a dying sun, all are, in some unfathomable way, participating in the same unfolding. What might this mean for consciousness? Could it be that awareness itself is non-local, that what we call my experience is not confined to this skull, this brain, this fleeting body? If entangled systems share information instantaneously, could consciousness be entangled with the world in ways we do not yet understand? Could it be that every act of perception, every thought, every spark of awareness resonates outward through a deeper field, rippling into places beyond our comprehension? These questions are not answered by physics, but they are provoked by it. Entanglement invites us to consider that the universe is not a collection of parts, but a web of relations. That what happens here is never just here, and that to observe one thing is, in a subtle but real way, to touch everything. In the next part, we will follow this thread to its most radical conclusion: the idea that reality itself may not be built from particles or even from matter, but from something more immaterial: information. We will explore the it from bit hypothesis and the notion that the universe may be more like a question than an answer. Because if everything is connected and everything responds to observation, then perhaps the fundamental unit of reality is not stuff, but meaning. As the entanglement experiments forced us to abandon the notion of a locally real universe, a new question began to surface. One that would shift the very foundations of how we understand what reality is made of. If particles don't have definite properties until observed, and if those properties can be correlated across vast distances without anything seemingly traveling between them, then what binds reality together? What is the thread connecting every observation, every collapse of potential into form? In search of answers, physicist John Archibald Wheeler proposed a radical idea, one that dared to rewrite the very grammar of existence. He called it from bit. Wheeler's concept is as elegant as it is unsettling. He suggested that the foundation of the universe is not matter, nor energy, nor even space-time. Instead, it is information. In his view, everything, the it, arises from a binary decision, a yes or no question, a bit. These are not metaphorical bits, but real informational choices embedded in the fabric of reality itself. According to Wheeler, what we call physical, particles, forces, laws, emerges from the answers to questions asked by measurement. The universe, in this sense, is not a machine. It is a conversation. This is not a loose analogy. Wheeler was serious. He envisioned a participatory universe in which the act of observation does not simply reveal an already existing reality, but actively brings it into being. Reality, then, is not something we passively inhabit. It is something we shape by the very structure of our questions. Each observation is a kind of inquiry, and each particle, each moment, each event is an answer. Not a predetermined answer, but one that arises only in response to the question being posed. To grasp the implications of this, consider a twist on the double-slit experiment known as the delayed choice experiment. In this version, the decision to measure the photon as a wave or a particle is made after it has already passed through the slits. And yet, the photon behaves in accordance with the later decision, as though the future choice determines the past behavior. It is as if the question itself reaches back in time to rewrite the answer. This has been tested, it has been confirmed, and it forces us to ask, what kind of universe behaves this way? A universe made of information, not substance. A reality where the observer and the observed are entangled not just across space, but across time. Where the structure of inquiry itself molds the unfolding of what is. In Wheeler's words, no phenomenon is a real phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. The word observed here does not merely mean seen. It means registered, interacted with, made meaningful. And that meaning arises through choice, through context, through the binary logic of distinction. Think of a game of 20 questions. The object in question does not exist in the mind of the questioner until enough answers are gathered to define it. Each answer narrows the field of possibility. And so it is with reality, Wheeler suggests. The universe is not a fixed object to be discovered. It is an evolving sequence of answers, responding to the questions consciousness dares to ask. This view has gained increasing traction in the realm of theoretical physics and digital physics. Some theorists now believe that the universe behaves much like a giant quantum computer. Not metaphorically, but literally. At the smallest scales, the universe may be processing information in discrete, quantized steps, just like bits of code. From this perspective, physical laws are algorithms, and particles are data structures, fluctuating packets of probabilistic information that take form only when engaged by an observer. But if this is so, then the act of observation, of inquiry, is not a trivial matter. It is the fundamental engine of existence. In such a model, consciousness is not a late-stage accident of evolution. It is not an epiphenomenon bubbling up from complex neural processes. It is woven into the matrix itself. The observer is not merely a bystander. It is a participant, a collaborator in the act of creation. This participatory universe reframes every assumption we carry. The wall between subject and object begins to dissolve. The old dichotomy between mind and matter starts to look like a linguistic artifact, not a metaphysical truth. If it arises from bit, then things are not made of other things. They are made of relations, choices, yes, no distinctions, patterns of information interacting in a fluid web of becoming. And if this is the case, Then what is the role of the human mind? Are we passive decoders of a vast informational stream, or active agents shaping the waveform of reality with every decision, every act of awareness? Perhaps both. Just as a computer cannot compute without an input, perhaps the universe cannot compute without participation. The laws may be stable, but the outcomes are not. Possibility needs a question to collapse into form, and the question needs a mind to be asked. This idea moves us closer to something once reserved for mystics: that the universe is conscious, not in the anthropomorphic sense of a being with a mind, but in the sense that it behaves like a field of intelligent responsiveness. It knows when it is being observed. It alters itself in the presence of inquiry. It speaks, but only when spoken to. And the language it speaks is information. For Wheeler, this was not science fiction. It was the logical consequence of quantum mechanics, taken to its final implication. It from bit was not just a slogan. It was a map, a way to navigate the strangeness of a world that becomes real only when we touch it. Not because it was hiding, but because it was waiting. Waiting for the question, waiting for us. And yet, even this picture is not complete. Because if reality is made of bits, then we must ask, who or what is interpreting those bits? Who assigns the meaning to the answer? Who receives the data, feels the shift, and says, "This is real"? In other words, if the universe is information, what is the medium through which that information becomes experience? This question leads us to a mystery older than physics and more intimate than mathematics. It leads us back to consciousness, not as a byproduct but as a baseline, a prerequisite, perhaps even the source from which the universe emerges. And so in the next part, we'll explore this possibility, that consciousness is not only fundamental, but ubiquitous, that it is not generated by brains, but expressed through them, that the universe is not only made of bits, but that every bit may shimmer with a trace of awareness. What if the very thing we've been searching for, the key to resolving the mysteries of observation, entanglement, and information, is not outside of us but is the very faculty with which we are searching? What if consciousness is not something the universe accidentally produced through random evolution, but something it always was? This is the quiet, unsettling thesis of Panpsychism, a theory as ancient as pre-Socratic philosophy, and as radical today as it was 2,000 years ago. Panpsychism suggests that consciousness is not an emergent property of biological complexity, but a fundamental feature of existence itself, that everything, in some infinitesimal but real sense, is aware. At first glance, this sounds like mysticism disguised in scientific clothing. We're comfortable with the idea that rocks are inert, trees are alive, and humans are conscious. But to say that a rock has any kind of experience feels absurd. Surely, there is a categorical difference between neural networks and lumps of stone. And yet, the problem of consciousness, the so-called hard problem, remains unresolved. Neuroscience has mapped brain activity in exquisite detail. It can correlate thoughts, emotions, decisions, and even moral reasoning with patterns of firing neurons. But it still cannot explain how or why any of this gives rise to experience. Why should a certain configuration of matter feel like anything at all? This question is not trivial. It is perhaps the most profound, open riddle in all of science and philosophy. How does subjective experience emerge from objective processes? How does a brain, made of atoms and molecules like everything else, give rise to the vivid, first-person world of sights, sounds, colors, and thoughts? The discomfort with panpsychism often stems from our assumption that consciousness must be like human consciousness, self-aware, language-based, reflective. But this may be a mistake of projection. Just as we used to imagine gods in our own image, we now imagine awareness as a uniquely human trait. But perhaps consciousness comes in gradients, in scales, in flickers, too subtle for us to detect. Panpsychism does not argue that a rock thinks. It does not suggest that your coffee mug has opinions or dreams. Rather, it posits that even the simplest units of matter, quarks, electrons, protons, may possess proto-conscious qualities. Not minds, not personalities, but a rudimentary subjectivity, a capacity to register or respond. And as these elementary particles combine into more complex systems, their micro-consciousnesses integrate into larger, more unified fields of experience. This would mean that the brain does not generate consciousness from scratch, but rather channels, organizes, and amplifies what was already present in matter itself. This view sidesteps the implausibility of materialism, that somehow, at a certain threshold of complexity, matter spontaneously becomes conscious. It also avoids the solipsism of idealism, that everything is just a projection of one's own mind. Instead, Panpsychism offers a middle path. The universe is made of mind and matter, not as opposites, but as two aspects of the same thing. Where there is matter, there is experience. Where there is information, there is awareness. It is not that consciousness emerges from the brain, but that the brain is an expression of consciousness configured in a certain way. This perspective reshapes our entire relationship with the world. If all things shimmer with some trace of awareness, then we are not isolated minds surrounded by dead matter. We are part of a continuum, a vast web of sentience expressing itself in different forms. The tree does not think like you do. The river does not reflect like you do. But that does not mean they are blind. They may simply feel differently. They may participate in a mode of being that defies language, but is no less real. Think for a moment about your own consciousness. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Is it confined to the skull? Or does it extend outward, into sensation, into memory, into anticipation, into the very act of attention itself? When you touch a hot stove, it is not just the skin that reacts. There is a thread that runs from fingertip to spine, to thought, to reflex. There is no clear boundary between awareness and the world. The field of experience is seamless. If this is true of you, then perhaps it is true in principle of everything. Perhaps consciousness is not something that happens inside a brain, but something that the brain localizes. Like a whirlpool in a river, the brain concentrates consciousness, but does not produce the water. And if the water of consciousness flows through all things, then the universe is not a place in which consciousness arises, but a process through which consciousness unfolds. Some modern physicists and philosophers have begun to take this possibility seriously. Integrated Information Theory, IIT, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness arises wherever there is a high degree of integrated information. This does not mean that every information system is conscious, but that there is a threshold, a degree of internal causation, that gives rise to experience. According to IIT, consciousness is not binary. It is not on or off. It comes in degrees, it comes in networks. And these networks may extend far beyond the human brain. If this is the case, then the universe may be filled with forms of awareness that we have never considered. The cosmos may be a nested hierarchy of consciousness, galaxies of mind within galaxies of form. From the simplest particles to the most complex organisms, each is a node in the symphony of perception. Each is playing its part in the song of being. And we, as human minds, are simply one kind of melody, brief, resonant, and astonishing. This vision does not negate science. It deepens it. It invites us to ask questions not just about what the universe is, but how it feels, and why it feels, and who, if anyone, is doing the feeling. It opens the possibility that observation affects reality, not because we are magical, but because everything, in some sense, is watching. Because consciousness is not something separate from the universe. It is the universe in the act of seeing itself. And this brings us to a profound shift in perspective. If the observer is everywhere, If consciousness saturates reality like light through stained glass, then every interaction is sacred. Every moment is relational, and every thought, every glance, every choice may ripple across the field of being in ways we cannot fathom. In the next part, we will follow this idea to its most provocative conclusion, that the universe itself may behave like a kind of mind, not metaphorically, but structurally. That consciousness is not simply within us, but that we are within it. And if this is so, then perhaps all observation is self-observation. Perhaps we are the universe learning to know itself, one flicker of awareness at a time. If consciousness is not limited to the human brain, if it is in some form embedded in matter itself, then a staggering possibility begins to emerge. What if the universe is not only conscious in its parts, but conscious as a whole? What if the cosmos itself behaves like a kind of mind? Not in the anthropomorphic sense of a divine being watching over us, but in the structural, functional sense of a system capable of self-organization, information exchange, and recursive awareness. What if, when we look out into the stars, we are not gazing into emptiness, but into the sprawling neural web of a thinking universe? To suggest that the universe could function like a brain is not pure fantasy. There are startling similarities between the architecture of neural networks and the large-scale structure of the cosmos. In recent years, computer simulations of the observable universe have revealed patterns that are eerily reminiscent of the human brain's connectome. Galaxies form vast filaments and nodes, linked by invisible dark matter in a structure that resembles the tangled web of neurons and synapses. The scale is unimaginably different, but the pattern is uncannily familiar. Researchers have even begun to compare the informational density of the brain with that of the universe. One 2020 study, published in Frontiers in Physics, estimated that the observable universe contains roughly 10 or 89 bits of information, while the human brain stores approximately 10 or 15 bits. That may seem like a vast disparity, but when viewed in terms of efficiency, how much information is stored per unit of mass, the numbers are surprisingly close. The comparison is crude, but provocative. It raises the question, could the universe be doing something akin to thinking? This idea is not new. The ancient Stoics believed in a concept called the Logos, a rational ordering principle that permeates the cosmos. In Hindu philosophy, the idea of Brahman describes a boundless consciousness in which all things arise and dissolve. Even in Western mysticism, there are echoes of this vision, that the universe is alive, intelligent, and self-aware in ways that transcend human cognition. Now, with the help of modern physics and systems theory, such ideas are no longer confined to the realm of spirituality. They are becoming legitimate questions within the realm of science. But what would it mean for the universe to think, to process information, to recognize itself in part through us? Perhaps we can answer this by returning to the observer. In quantum mechanics, we have seen that observation is not passive. It participates in reality's unfolding. In information theory, we've seen that binary questions collapse uncertainty into form. And in Panpsychism, we've considered that consciousness might be fundamental, existing in varying degrees across all matter. What happens when we connect these dots? We begin to see the universe not as a static collection of objects, but as a dynamic web of interactions. Each node, a particle, a star, a neuron, is not just a thing, but a process, a relational moment, a site where information is received, processed, and transmitted. And if enough of these nodes are entangled in recursive feedback loops, systems that refer back to themselves, adapt, and evolve, then we might reasonably call that a mind. Just as no single neuron in your brain is conscious, yet the network as a whole gives rise to awareness. Perhaps no single galaxy is self-aware, but the universe as a total system achieves something like sentience. We, as thinking beings, may simply be local intensifications of this greater awareness, neurons in the mind of the cosmos, reflecting back fragments of its intelligence. In this view, our thoughts are not private signals. They are eddies in the larger current. Our questions are not noise. They are signals echoing through the system. This interpretation invites a radical humility. We are not the authors of meaning, nor its exclusive recipients. We are participants in a much older conversation, one that began before time, before matter, before selfhood. And this conversation is ongoing. Every act of observation is a continuation of the cosmic self-inquiry. Every new understanding is the universe learning something new about itself. There's a powerful metaphor that captures this. Two mirrors facing each other. When we observe reality, and reality observes us in return, we create an infinite loop of reflection. Awareness begets awareness. Meaning begets meaning. And somewhere in that recursive play, something emerges that cannot be located in either mirror, but only in the relationship between them. Perhaps this is what the mystics intuited when they said that the self and the world are not two. That consciousness is not inside the head, and the world outside it, but that both arise simultaneously in a shared field of being. The universe is not separate from its contents, just as a mind is not separate from its thoughts. And if that is true, then our efforts to understand reality, to observe, to measure, to name, are not acts of domination, but acts of communion. This does not mean the universe thinks in words. It does not plot or plan, but it may self-organize. It may process novelty. It may remember. It may, through the interplay of its countless components, generate emergent properties that transcend simple causality. Intelligence does not always wear the face we expect. It may appear as pattern, harmony, recursion, adaptability. And consciousness may not be something the universe has, but something it is, in varying degrees, in evolving forms. So, what then are we? Perhaps we are nodes of localized coherence, temporary concentrations of awareness through which the universe peers back at itself. Perhaps every time we ask, "What am I?" the cosmos listens and replies in kind, not with an answer, but with a question of its own. Of course, these are speculations. Science has not confirmed that the universe thinks, or that consciousness is distributed across all matter. But the fact that we are now seriously asking such questions reveals a deeper truth, that our old models of mind and matter, of self and world, are no longer sufficient. The boundaries have blurred, the lines have curved back upon themselves. And in that curvature, something new is emerging, a vision of reality in which we are not alone, not separate, not incidental. In the next and final part of this exploration, we will return to the root of the mystery, the question of what we can actually know. We will examine the limits of knowledge, the nature of unknowing, and the possibility that mystery is not a failure of comprehension, but a feature of the system itself. Because if the universe is conscious, and we are its mirrors, then perhaps not everything can be seen. Perhaps some truths are not meant to be grasped, but only lived. For all our theories and models, for all the equations etched into chalkboards and consciousness studies debated in lecture halls, a quiet truth hums beneath it all. We do not know, and perhaps we cannot. This is not a failure of intellect, nor a weakness of will. It is the inevitable boundary line of awareness, where the known dissolves into the ocean of the unknowable, where maps give way to mystery, and where language, no matter how precise, begins to stutter. Science has given us profound tools, microscopes and particle accelerators, space telescopes and supercomputers, and with them, we have peered into realms both infinitely small and inconceivably vast. We have split atoms and measured starlight from galaxies long dead. And yet, at the heart of our deepest investigations lies a paradox. The more we look, the more it seems that looking itself changes what is seen. The more we learn, the more we realize how much lies forever just beyond our reach. Philosophy, too, has chased the truth for centuries. through logic, dialectic, intuition, and reflection. It has circled the problem of consciousness like a hawk, diving deeper into the riddles of self and other, of mind and matter. But for all its brilliance, philosophy also arrives here, at the edge, the place where even the sharpest concepts begin to blur, where answers begin to look suspiciously like better questions. And so we are left with something both terrifying and beautiful, the unknown, not as a temporary gap in knowledge, but as a fundamental feature of existence itself. Not everything can be reduced, decoded, or diagrammed. Reality may not be a closed system. It may be participatory, open-ended, unfinished. And to truly stand before this truth is to bow, not in defeat, but in reverence. Humility is not the opposite of understanding. It is its completion. It reminds us that we are not above the mystery, nor outside it. We are immersed in it. We are it. It is here, at this threshold, that we return to Sonder. That quiet, haunting awareness that every person we pass is living a life as complex and vivid as our own. That we are not just walking through a world of objects, but through a vast ocean of experiences. That consciousness is not contained behind a single face, but scattered like light through every eye that sees. What began as a personal revelation, I am not the center, transforms into a universal realization. There is no center. There is only the field, the web, the shared theater of being. Perhaps the universe is not merely being observed. Perhaps it is experiencing itself. Through your eyes, through mine, through every flicker of awareness on this planet and beyond. Perhaps each moment of insight, each pulse of emotion, each word spoken in wonder or confusion is not isolated, but woven into a larger pattern, an unfolding story the universe tells about itself, to itself. We may never know whether reality has an edge. We may never find the final answer, the unifying theory, the God equation. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe truth is not a static fact to be seized, but a current to be moved with, a rhythm to be danced with, a silence to be listened into. What matters then is not whether we conquer the unknown, but whether we remain in conversation with it, whether we approach it with awe, with courage, and with an open heart. Because if everything we've explored is even partially true, if observation shapes the observed, if information underlies existence, if consciousness suffuses the cosmos, then we are not spectators. We are participants, and not just in some abstract philosophical sense, in the most immediate, lived way. Every act of attention is a thread in the tapestry. Every question asked is a nudge in the direction of becoming. The unknowable is not a wall, it is a mirror. And when we lean in, what we see reflected may not be the face of the universe, but its eyes, watching through us, wondering through us, becoming through us. So perhaps it is not that we observe consciousness. Perhaps it is consciousness observing itself through the lens of a world, a body, a fleeting mind that dares to ask what it means to be alive. And in that question, the story continues.